Everybody. I am excited to be here with all of you today and able to share with you some of the sacred knowledge that has been passed down to me. So prior to starting the conversation in regards to two-spirit narratives in the Danza, Mexica, Aztec community, I wanted to share with all of you a video so that we can be a little more familiar with the term two-spirit. I would love to give a whole historical presentation on two-spiritness, but for the focus of today's presentation, I'm going to be sharing narratives, but I want you all to be able to understand the root of this word and where it comes from and the way that some of us understand this. So we're going to start with the video so that we can all understand the term a little bit better. And then that way we can move forward in the presentation. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And then if y'all can just give me a thumbs up to make sure that you can see my screen and that you can hear everything. Can everybody see my screen? Okay, perfect.
We can see it.
Two-spirit one more time. Though the label has only been used since the 90s, the concept of the two-spirit is something indigenous groups have identified with for centuries. But what does two-spirit actually mean, and where does it come from? So what is two-spirit? It's an umbrella term that bridges indigenous and Western understandings of gender and sexuality. You may recognize it as the two that sometimes appears on the end of LGBTQ2. There are many definitions and understandings of two-spirit, and each is nation-specific. The term was intentionally introduced by Native people with the goal of finding common ground and helping educate about traditional teachings in a contemporary context. The Two-Spirit Society of Denver offers the following definition. Two-spirit refers to another gender role believed to be common among most, if not all, First Peoples of Turtle Island, North America, one that had a proper and accepted place within Native societies. This acceptance was rooted in the spiritual teachings that say all life is sacred. So how did the term two-spirit first come about? In 1990, in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada, at the 3rd annual Native American Gay and Lesbian Gathering, the term two-spirit was proposed and affirmed by consensus. The word was a potential solution to what Native scholars and activists called the problem of naming, or making the many different sexual and gender identities that fall under the two-spirit umbrella legible across Native and non-Native cultures alike. For example, to illustrate the diversity of meanings that two-spirit contains, consider the following. In Lakota, the word winkte means to be as a woman and refers to two-souled Lakota people who transgress boundaries of gender from what may be considered male to female. In Dene, nadlehe means those who transform and refers to one of 4 separate genders: masculine, feminine, masculine, masculine, feminine, masculine, and feminine, feminine. Each gender has its own word in the Dene language. And those are just 2 nation-specific examples. There are so many more. Each nation's understanding of gender and sexual diversity is different and grounded in specific spiritual beliefs. Although all nations don't have a concept of two-spirit people, across those indigenous nations that do, two-spirit people were historically held in high regard and often considered sacred or divine, holding important positions like matchmakers, medicine people, or warriors on the front lines of battle. Many two-spirit people perform roles traditionally assigned to both men and women. Witwa, a famous two-spirit of the Zuni or Ihamana, was known to take part in masculine tribal matters and feminine tribal matters, and was even sent as an official Zuni delegate to Washington, D.C. Part of the reason two-spirit was adopted at the 1990 conference was because much of the written record on the indigenous nations of North America begins with European contact. For instance, the writings of Jesuit priests from the 1600s contain references to berdaches, which means kept boy in French, to refer to those who embodied both male and female genders. These writings often focus negatively on perceived cross-dressing among the Anishinaabe. The term is not only inaccurate in that it projects a European understanding of gender, but is widely considered pejorative by natives. Two-spirit was an attempt at self-determination across linguistic barriers, because the existing language, foreign and imposed violently on the indigenous peoples of North America, was both offensive and deeply colonial in its gaze. European colonizers imposed homophobia, rigid binary gender roles, and misogyny under the guise of civilizing indigenous people through the Christian tradition in residential schools and beyond. As a result, indigenous people were robbed not only of their land, but of their spiritual traditions and way of life regarding two-spirit people. Many nations came to forbid and punish two-spirit unions and self-expression. As recently as 2004, Kathy Reynolds and Dawn McKinley, two Cherokee women in Tulsa, Oklahoma, attempted to marry under tribal law, setting off a convoluted legal battle with serious political and social implications. The two were thrust into the spotlight against their wishes and became instant public symbols of the battle for two-spirit rights under tribal law. The Cherokee tribe is the second largest in the US. Although they were granted the right to marry, the decision to issue them a marriage license was soon challenged and led to a tribal law declaring that a union was to be between a man and a woman. Eventually, in 2016, the law was overturned. By that time, a wider cultural shift had taken place, both outside of and within the Cherokee Nation. In recent years, many Native people are returning to their two-spirit traditions as a way to heal from the injustices the American colonial project has visited upon their ancestors and traditions. In 2011, the first known US two-spirit powwow was organized by the Bay Area American Indian Two-Spirits. Since then, powwows honoring two-spirits have been held in Montana and Kansas. And in March of 2017, the largest powwow in the US, the Gathering of Nations, honored two-spirit people during its grand entry. Two-spirit identity is resilient and precious. It has survived centuries of colonial violence and prejudice. These sacred ways of knowing live on amongst Native youth seeking to know more about themselves, elders who have kept the traditions alive in spite of the odds, and anyone in between. It should go without saying, but two-spirit is not a poetic way for non-Native LGBTQ people to express themselves. We're looking at you, Jason Mraz. It is, however, a sacred tradition among the first peoples of this land we call Turtle Island that all of its inhabitants should know about and respect.
All right, I wanted to go ahead and start with that video so that we can all have a little bit of a better understanding of what the term two-spirit may mean. And I'll go ahead and drop it in the chat just in case you all want to watch it on your own time as well, so that you can take notes of parts you may have missed. That's the best, shortest video I can find for all of us to kind of get a better understanding of the term two-spirit. So as this individual mentioned, two-spirit is an umbrella term for what gender and sexuality looks like for many different Native and Indigenous communities. A lot of folks do tend to romanticize the acceptance of gender and sexuality in Native American or Indigenous communities. And as this individual also mentioned, that isn't the case for all the nations. There is some nations where there is a lot of historical trauma that has occurred, where a lot of shift has happened. So that is one of the biggest lessons that I've learned, and one of the biggest things that my elders have always taught me, to reassure that I am also not reinforcing romanticized versions of what it means to be Indigenous or what it means to be Native, because just like all other humans and things, there's a lot of complications in our identity as well, and especially as a result of colonization. And so without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started. If any of you have any questions throughout the presentation, please drop them in the chat box, and Sophia will make sure that I'm able to pay attention to the questions. We will have a Q&A at the end of the presentation as well. And I do also just want to make sure that we all remember that everything that is shared here is sacred, that the knowledge is not to be replicated, it's to be shared but not replicated. So just honor and really just be open to everything that I'm going to share with all of you today. Let's go ahead and get started. Okay, and then just once again, if I can just get a thumbs up to make sure that you can all see the presentation. Perfect. Okay. So as Sophia mentioned, my name is Matli Erika Landa Sarmiento. Now, the reason why I put Erika Landa Sarmiento in quotation marks is because that is the name that was given to me at birth by my parents, which of course I honor both of the last names and the places they came from and the name that I was given. However, I identify as Chicana and Nahua from the region of Puebla, Mexico. I was born in Puebla, Mexico. I identify as a DACA recipient. And so Matli, the name Matli actually comes from my danza community, my Aztec dance community. So Matli is a combination of both also Matli and Malinali. So on the Aztec calendar, quote unquote, on the day that I was born on the cusp of the day of the monkey and the day of Malinali of the plant. And so you can see on the right side the monkey, and then on the other side is Malinali. And so those who were born on the day of also Matli are known to carry love, dance, and happiness. That is what they symbolize, what they represent. And the folks who were born on the day of Malinali are healers of the community, work with the plants closely, and with Mother Earth. And so I identify and gravitate more with the name that was given to me through Danza, which is Matli. There's many different ways in which you can come to receiving a name in the Danza community. There's ceremonial ways in which your name is officially given to you. However, my name was given to me by my circle Two Spirit, now family members, friends, who I have been doing Two Spirit ceremony with for the past 3 years now. And we were having a conversation around the fire one day, and I was like, yeah, like I just like the identification with Erika, it's like weird. And they all had their danza names at that time. And so we were just kind of messing around with different terms. And so Matli is a name that I've carried for the past 3 years. So I do want to acknowledge that I am on stolen Nisan land, so currently located in Sacramento. Just want to acknowledge that I am on territory that's not mine, and working towards being a part of the movement while I'm here. I am the MCC program coordinator for Latinx and indigenous initiatives. So also a big role and component in all of this. But I just wanted to make sure that I started in centering where I'm from, so that you can all better understand why it is that I share all of this knowledge with you. So most, if not all, my presentation is pictures, images. So I hope that it doesn't feel like I'm lecturing anybody or you're not in class. So the first picture, Olin and Nawa, is movement. And so the reason why I chose this picture is because I came to my identity as a two-spirit person through Danza Azteca, through Danza Mexica. And the first time that I ever got to be a part of this community, of this movement, was in 2014, when there was 43 students who were disappeared in Guerrero, in Ayotzinapa, Guerrero. And so in that time, I was an undergraduate at Cal State Channel Islands. And the organization that I was a part of, Mecha, was heavily involved in helping to get the stories out of these students. The caravan of the parents of the 43 students made a stop in Oxnard, where I was currently living. And we offered them dance and prayer. And so the person that you see on my left side, I'm in the center in the black dress, but the person that you see on the left side in the teal looking shirt, that's Compa Chente, that's my hermano Chente. He threw me into the circle. I had never danced before. I had never known anything about danza other than, what I verbally had heard from him at that point. And he's like, come on, hermana, like you're going to help me run the círculo and you're going to dance with us. And I was like, I've never danced any of this. And he told me, he's all like, we're praying, like, just think about it as praying. Don't think about anything else. And so that it was, I think, like a 2-hour kind of ceremony blessing that we were giving to the parents, and the parents were sitting in the center of the circle. So you could see there's 2 parents that you could kind of see closer on the other side, on the right hand side, but the mujer that's standing is one of the people who made me have this love, this deep love and understanding of what healing means in a non-Western way. She's a mother of one of the students who disappeared, and I had been dancing quote unquote, because I was just like mimicking everything I was seeing. I didn't know the dances then. But I was like dancing, and I was really praying when I was doing this, and really like just hoping for her to be healed, because I could see the pain in her eyes. And when we finished, I remember she came up to me and she's like, mija, nunca dejes de danzar, to never stop dancing. And I asked her why, and she said, I didn't know that that was a way to heal. And that stuck with me. That stuck with me deeply. Like just like being a part of Mecha was always like we were at protests, we were at walkouts, we were at sit-ins, we were, calling our assembly members. It was always very demanding, right? And when it came to healing, it was like, yeah, we go to therapy, we do journaling, we do meditating, all great things, right? But like none of that was connected to my ancestors' ways of healing. And so that's how I came to be in danza, and that's how I started to learn about danza mexica. And through that, I actually started as a psychology major, but because there was lack of representation in the Latinx community in the department at that time, I felt very out of place. I felt very unwelcome. I felt like a lot of things that I was learning were not going to apply to the communities I wanted to work with. And so because I was in Mecha and because I started dancing, I started to learn more about Chicana and Chicano studies, now known as Chicanx studies. And so in this process, we got to hire this incredible mujer who's on the far right side. Her name is Dr. Jenny Luna. I highly encourage all of you to look up her work. She does incredible work around danza activism. And so from Dr. Jenny Luna, I learned so much. She is my lifelong maestra of danza, of just being in the educational system as a mujer, as a queer Chicana, brown, undocumented women. And so with Dr. Jenny Luna, when I was starting to think about my senior project when I was graduating, she had been doing work on dance activism, as I said, and she asked me to help her with the region of documenting the stories of two-spirit people in California. And so I had never really been too familiar with the two-spirit community or the world. But growing up, I always understood that I was different. I never identified as gay or lesbian or bisexual or LGBTQ. I never came out of the closet. We never really talked about it. And it was never about being ashamed about my gender and my sexuality or about being afraid of what can happen. It was always to me very intimate, very sacred, very to myself. And so whoever I dated, whether it was male or female identified, to me, it was a person that I chose to protect and a person that I chose to love and that I didn't need to expose and tell the world to. And a lot of people understand that very differently. And even for my family is very Catholic, Latinx, heavily like, like a woman and a male, and that's how it is, and da da da. And it was always like that. But I wasn't scared and I wasn't ashamed or anything. It was just very mine. And so as I started to do this research in Chicana and Chicana studies with Two-Spirit danzantes, I began to realize that like so many things made sense because they are in our DNA. And if we just pay attention to it and we follow what our ancestors are trying to tell us and tell us to do, a lot of things start to fall into place. And so this picture is when we presented at the National Association for Chicana Studies Conference. I believe this was in Albuquerque, Nuevo Mexico. So we got to present on danza. Some of the folks did like danza activism in the youth, and then like restorative justice, and then I was focused on the two-spirit folks. And so in that research, this is actually my background. In the research is where I got to meet my two-spirit, even I call him my two-spirit dad. His name is Chico. Chico, oh my goodness, there's so much I could say about Chico. But Chico is a two-spirit folk who lives on Sequoia land, so near, if not in the Sequoia National Park. It's a little complicated in terms of land and who owns it, but he lives on Tule Nation land. And so Chico is the person who organizes the two-spirit ceremony that happens every year here in California in April. And so in this ceremony, when it first began, it was mostly only folks in California who identify as two-spirit. But then over the years, it has grown. So we've gotten people that come from New Zealand, from Canada, from Australia, from Mexico, from Chile. So we started to have a much more diverse pool and understanding of what two-spirit means in different places of the world, right? And as an individual from the YouTube video explained a little, two-spirit is an umbrella term that allowed for a lot of indigenous nations to be able to understand gender and sexuality different than that of the westernized world. And so Chico has been the person that has taught me about two-spiritedness, the person who has helped me to not accept, but to be okay with saying, yes, like that is what I identify with. A lot of the times, a lot of things can feel very icky when it comes to identity. And I think that goes for everything. It's very complex. Like, oh, if I say that I'm Chicana, like people are going to suddenly think that like, you know, I'm radical and I know all of Gloria Anzaldua's books. And if I say I'm Mexicana, they're going to want me to like, no, I don't know, like who Vicente Fernandez is. And there's just a lot that comes with, right? I remember when my sister started to understand that I was two-spirit, they were like, well, should we get you like shirts with rainbows and like unicorns? And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, no, I'm still the same person. Like there's folks who that is their identity and that's 100% okay, 110%, that is who they are, but that's not who I was. And so, and saying I'm two-spirit, I always tell Chico, like, I just feel like I don't want anybody to feel like I'm disrespecting something that's so sacred and so spiritual. I don't want anybody to just think that I know all the history of what it means to be two-spirit, because I don't, right? And so Chico always reinforces me and tells me like, this is who you are, this is your identity, this is who you've been since you were little. You knew that there was something different in you, and in saying that you are two-spirit, your only job is to constantly learn, and to constantly protect the earth that we live on. And so when I say that I am two-spirit, it's constantly making a commitment that I am going to protect any land that I am on, that I am going to be a part of any nation whose land I'm on, and honor them and uplift them and acknowledge them, far beyond land acknowledgement, and in making sure that I, as I said, I'm constantly learning, right? I don't know the history of like all the gender and sexuality terms in all indigenous nations, but I am constantly learning about my own, about the people, the people from Puebla, the Nahuatl people, right? Because that's where I come, that's where my ancestry comes from. And I'm recently on a path of getting to know a little bit more of Veracruz, because my father's side is from Veracruz. And so there's a lot that comes with saying that you are two-spirit, but it is a daily commitment, and it's far more spiritual than it is of an identity of sexuality and gender and what those things can mean. And so moving on to the second narrative that I wanna teach about, and I'll go back to Chico once we hit the ceremonial part, because there's more in regards to Chico for that. But the second narrative that I wanted to share is Tlawitz Papalo, and this is what I mean by we all have our danza names. So Tlawitz Papalo is both the bird and the butterfly in its name. Tlawitz Papalo identifies as they, them, el. Another thing about us, at least for my circle, two-spirit people, is like, yes, we will go with like what is your preferred gender pronouns, but also like we are everything. So like I'm not gonna sit here and be like, hey, you called me she when I'm like him or they. So similar with Tlawitz Papalo, like I would be like, oh, what do you want me to say? It's like, I'm Angel, I'm Tlawitz Papalo, like whatever you want to say. And so I met Angel, or Tlawitz as I call him, at my first two-spirit ceremony. Tlawitz is a person who was raised in Manteca, and then moved out to the Bay Area, who's currently living in Oakland and is one of the organizers for Bates, so for the Bay Area Indian American Two-Spirit Power Organization. So he plays a big role in that, and has played a big role in the Two-Spirit ceremony that we do down in the Sequoia as well. Is super highly active and engaged in working with communities for HIV and for other like health situations that folks go through in the Bay Area. And so Tlawitz does a lot of that work. And the reason why Tlawitz is so important to me is because through Tlawitz, I've learned so much about not the two-spirit umbrella term, but the term mushe. So I don't know if y'all are familiar with the term mushe or muje, but that is the term that is used in Oaxaca. So in the state of Oaxaca, I was gonna say country, in the state of Oaxaca, that is one of the many gender and sexuality terms that folks use to identify. And so Tlawit has taught me about mushes and how their roles in society were played and seen, how they were seen as very, very sacred, very important, held in high regards. And so I've felt so blessed to know Tlawit for the past 3 years now. Tlawit teaches me so much about plants. So you could see all the way on the bottom right, we're holding plantas. And so the first time that I had learned how to set up for a sweat lodge for a temescal, I didn't know that you had to find the 7 plantas, and I didn't know what they look like because I had never been so in tune. And I was like, oh, well, they all look the same. They're like kind of green and purple. Like, can we just grab and go? And Tlawit took the time to like walk me through the land and help me like identify smells and touches and textures and being able to find these plants, but also what they symbolize and the representation between behind needing each of these 7 plants when we're doing sweat lodge. And so through Tlawit, I've in tuned so much into my Malinali identity, my identity of being a healer with plants and understanding that far more than what I did before. The top left is the first picture that they ever took of us. That was when I was at the first Two Spirit ceremony. And I remember dancing next to Tlawit, and I told him, I was like, this is like my first big ceremony. I only know like 4 danzas, and the danza ceremony was going to go on for like 2 hours. So I was like, I'm going to need to know more than 4. And I felt really intimidated. One thing about danza, and hopefully, and maybe that will be a whole other conversation one day, but when you see Aztec dancers, Mexica dancers, you see them with a lot of feathers mostly. You see them with a lot of regalia, but all of those things are earned, and all of those things, like, they're not given, and they symbolize something. And so here, until this day, actually, I don't wear feathers yet. I don't feel that I hold enough knowledge to have my feathers yet. But Tlawit has his feathers, has been dancing for generations, for years. But Tlawit was like, oh no, don't worry about it. Like, just follow me. Like, I'll tell you how to dance. Like, I got you. And yeah, like the whole 2 hours, like I learned so much from Tlawit in those 2 hours of how to dance. And he's like, don't try to go fast. If you see them dancing fast to keep up, like, you need to be in gear prayer. And if you need to dance slower than everybody, then let it be. And I was like, but it's gonna look wrong. Like, we're not all coordinated. I was a dancer in high school and a cheerleader. And so I was always taught, like, we need to look like, perfect. But in the danza world, it's not like that. In the danza world, like, you are praying, you are doing what you need to do as you hear the drum, as you hear the beat. So Tlawit has taught me a lot about danza. And then the center picture is in Oakland. So in Oakland, every month they used to do the red market, the red indigenous market, where a bunch of native and indigenous folks sold their I was gonna say their products, but not their products, their art, their whatever it is that they create. It's just like a little market that happens. And then we always offer danza. And it happens at the Native American Health Center in Oakland. And so that's a story of Tlawit's. And then moving on, we have Xochitl. So Xochitl, Edgar is his birth given name. Edgar is also from the Bay Area. So I also met Xochitl at my first Two Spirit ceremony. And Xochitl, my goodness, knows so much about plants, knows so much about flowers, about the ecosystem, about environmental justice. And something that I'm trying to learn more of, that Xochitl is always talking about, is queer ecology. So I don't know how many of you may be familiar with like queer ecology or like just with ecology in general. I'm not too familiar, I will say. But every time that we come together, like Xochitl is always like, yeah, like the pollination of this flower and this flower is queer when it crosses, and the habitat of this place and this land. And so there's so much that even like the land produces in regards to like queerness that we don't understand. And if we pay more attention to, we can understand why we may have like certain characteristics. Just like when you stare at an animal, right? And you like, oh, like that's why the animal does this. And like sometimes I do this and I see why the animal does this and I do this too. And so learning about queer ecology is something that is in my to-do list of more of. because Sochi talks about it in a way that's like so sacred, and helps us to understand why it is so important to protect the land, right? Like I know that at least for myself as an indigenous person, I've been taught that land is so important and that we must protect land because water is sacred, because the mountains are sacred, but never to the extent of something as simple of like the pollination of two flowers that weren't meant to be together, right? And so that is what Xochitl has taught me. Xochitl has also taught me how to not listen to others. And I know that sounds like, what do you mean not listen to others? But what I mean is in the danza world, there is moments where it's a little difficult to navigate being someone who's barely learning and being someone who is trying to queer danza spaces, as the title says it. So a little bit of a breakdown. For most danza spaces, there's protocols, there's ways of doing things, there's rules that have been, not rules, protocols that have been established for generations, where women have a certain role in what they can do in these spaces, and men have a certain role of what they can do in these spaces. Now, there is maestras, teachers who have been teaching this for generations. And when you try to change that, especially as a young person, you are questioned. You are questioned and you are seen as like you're destroying what is sacred. But then there's other maestros, teachers, and elders who will say, yes, like that is where we're going. We need to change. As we are evolving, we need to change. And so Xochitl is one of the persons who you will constantly catch getting in trouble with elders and with maestros, because is unapologetic, and it's like we need to evolve because this does not suit and fit all of us. This does not include all of us. And so I remember the first time I got in trouble with Sochi was about blowing a conch shell. So the big shells that you see that they blow to make the sound in danza spaces sometimes. Oh, it's on the far left. He's blowing the conch shell. I guess, blew it at the wrong time, and one of the elders got mad, and I was like, I just don't understand. If it is his conch shell and he feels like he is in prayer and he needs to blow this because something is happening in him, then why do you get to, like say like it is not the time? And so I was pretty like upset. I remember I had cried because I was like, oh my gosh, like I disappointed one of like the most important elders, and like now nobody's gonna talk to me. And like Sochi was like, why are you so worried? Like, did you feel prayer when we did it? I was like, yes. He's like, so then what is the point here? And I was like, I just don't want to disrespect her. And it was like, yes, to an extent that was never the intention of either Xochitl or I, right? But also then what happens with like, we should learn from the young ones too, right? It's not just, oh, we learn from the elders and only the elders can teach, but like we should also be learning from the young people. And so one of the things that I always try to remember a lot as I'm getting older, in the danza spaces, I never want to be the elder that a young person can feel like, oh, can I like bring something up that's new, that should be different, that I never want to be that elder that young people don't feel that they can't like come to me for. And so Sochi has taught me how to be just that, right? Like how to be unapologetic, but also, hey, I'm sorry that you felt that way, because Sochi did like cook our elder like a really good pot of like lentil soup afterwards, and it was like, I'm so sorry that that's the way that you felt, and I'm sorry that you have so much trauma, and let's try to better understand each other. So it's a balance both of like we need change, but also I honor you because you have held like all of this knowledge for generations, right? And so that is Sochi. Sochi is also there's a lot of there's some folks in danza who will be like, oh, you shouldn't dress like too naked and you shouldn't dress in what's not like traditional Aztec regalia. And then comes Sochi wearing something completely like crazy. And in some cases, Sochi has worn only flowers on his body when we dance. And like a lot of the elders are like, what is this? Like you're moving away from what it is. But it's like, that is who Sochi is. Sochi literally means flower in Nahuatl. Like that is what Sochi identifies with. That is who Sochi is. And so Sochi has just taught me how to be okay with being different, but also finding the boundary of making sure that we're respecting our elders as we do this. And Sochi identifies as Two Spirit and works in the Bay Area in a farm. where he plants and like preserves a lot of like the sacred native plants from the area of the Saratoga and the Ohlone Ramaytush folks. And so that is a little bit of the narrative of Xochitl. And then there's so much more narratives that are out there of two-spirit folks that I got to meet when I started and that I continue to meet. On the far left side is the picture of danzantes in Bakersfield. So Bakersfield is probably the closest place to Chico's land where they're able to go and dance. And so there's a big circle there of two-spirit folks in Bakersfield that we went to go dance with. And so getting to understand a little bit more of the genocide that occurred specifically to two-spirit people in the, is it called the Central Valley? I believe in the center part of California. I always think of the valley and down in the SoCal area. But like Bakersfield, Fresno, and all that area, there was a very intentional genocide of two-spirit people. And so the people from Bakersfield really talk about that and really try to get you to understand, because we don't read that, we don't hear about that. If you're not from the valley, like it's very rare for you to hear that there was a very specific genocide to two-spirit people there. And so I learned a lot from them. And then in the center picture, that is like the circle, the root of the two-spirit people, my two-spirit familia, who I constantly grow with and learn from. So all five of us, we come to the land throughout the year prior to the April ceremony to get the land prepared, to learn more, to brainstorm workshop ideas, to do sweat lodge together, just to grow together. And to understand what it means to be two-spirit together. And so on the far left side, we have River. And so River is incredible. Always walks us through a lot of meditation. River is a traveler, so travels to so many reservations, to so many lands, to so many places. So River is like a holder of so many like different traditions and cultures and ways of being indigenous. And then we have Xochitl, who you learned about. And then in the center is Ron. Ron is an incredible queer Black man from LA who does incredible work in just violence with police brutality, focuses a lot on that. But when he has the time, he comes to the land and prays with us too. And so one of the things that Ron has taught us is just what it means to be a Black queer danzante, and what it means to be accepted into that space with that being his skin color, with that being his identity, and the complexities of colonization of a product of all of that. And then we have Soch, and then there's me. So that's like my core two-spirit familia, I would say. And then on the far right side, that's a picture, I believe, of last year, not last year because we didn't have it, the year before. And that was the last ceremony that we had in person. And it's a picture of the friendship dance. So as you can see here in the picture, like not everybody is dressed in the same regalia. Not everybody is an Aztec dancer or a Mexica dancer. It's a combination of all the nations that come together for two-spirit. And so when we're finally done dancing and with other ceremonial parts of it, we all hold hands and spiral around until it eventually becomes one circle. And so it's called the friendship dance, and a lot of like ceremonies will usually end with that. But that is, I met so many incredible people in that space. And so lastly, I know I also want to leave time for questions. So I'm gonna close in this last 5 minutes, and then with the last 15 minutes, we'll open up to questions. Does that sound good to everybody? Perfect. Okay. So the last part that I wanted to talk about is the ceremony part. And so I will say the ceremonies are very specific to Mexica, Aztec culture, because that is what I have learned. And so on the top left side, right here, you will see all of this is basically I don't know the names in English, but it's basically the little pieces of wood that come out of like a wood when you sand it, and they're just tie-dyed kind of thing. And there was like an artist who put all of this together throughout the night in ceremony with the moon as we were preparing for the next day where we were going to be dancing. And so we put chairs around because the ceremony does welcome kids. And so the kids would get pretty excited and try to go step on it. And so it was a little hard at the beginning. But this is basically the circle where we dance for the next 2 days, and it's the sacred space of just sharing in círculo together. And so right here is a picture of an altar in the center top, yeah, in the center top. It's a picture of an altar. So basically an altar and ofrenda is when we do have practice or ceremony together. Once a week, a lot of danza grupos come together once a week to share prayer, or they call it práctica, practice. Usually in the past, the way that I've learned, there is some elders, some maestros who will say only the female identified people can set up the altar. And it has to do with energy and the energy of being able to produce life, right? And then there's other maestras and maestros who are like, whoever feels that this prayer is, the prayer is intended for, can set up altar today. And then there will be people who will just like, oh, only the kids can do it because the kids have like the sacred new clean energy. That sounded like a bus commercial, new clean energy. But there's very specific ways, and it's always just going to depend on the maestro and the maestro who's running the circle. And so one of the biggest consejos that I can say if you ever want to try out danza is to make sure that when you go into this space, you listen to like what is their way of carrying círculo. And so this was a círculo in Oakland. So I danced with a Grupo Cuautlicue when I was in grad school at USF for 2.5 years. And so Grupo Cuautlicue was always more of, usually it would be either a female identified person or whoever felt prayer, but they were very specific to that. And so in altar, some of like the sacred elements that should always go are the 4 sacred elements. So it's going to be water, it's going to be air, it's going to be the plants for like Mother Earth. And then I'm missing one final one right now, and my head is not coming. But you have to symbolize the 4 elements into the altar, and that can mean like putting bananas and oranges on it and flowers. And the fire is usually the sacred medicine that we light, whether it's the tree resin or sage, whatever it is that grupo lights up. That usually represents wind and fire, because you need the wind for it to be able to continue to go through. So that's one of the ways in which there's a lot of queer danzantes who like to challenge, like, why could it only be the female identified people who set up altar? And so some maestros will be a little bit like more like, and so Xochitl actually was one of the people who in this grupo was like, well, I want to set up altar and I'm not female identified, but I'm two-spirit. And so there was a whole like commotion when that happened. But eventually Xochitl ended up setting altar moving forward. And the conversation here on the bottom left is the picture. You could barely faintly see it, and I was very hesitant in taking that picture, but this is a picture of sweat lodge or traditional temescal. So basically it's like a built up kind of like a little tent. I'm trying to explain it as like westernized as I can, but kind of like a tent. And so a Native American, or at least on Shumashlan, where I learned down in the Ventura area, for sweat lodge is basically made out of wood, and then they put carps until it's like thick enough so that when you light it up inside, it gets pretty hot. But in Mexica tradition in Mexico, mostly it's made out of barro, and I don't know what barro is called in English. I am so sorry. But like the thicker cement, the adobe, I think it's kind of like adobe. And so it's built out of that, and then only the top is left open, and then they put the carps over the top. And then in the center of it is a big deep hole that's pretty deep. And on the outside part of it right here, you can see that there's big rocks of coal. And so what happens is they light them up and they put them in the center, and people sit around in the circle inside. And so depending on who is doing the ceremony, they'll make it really hot or they'll make it pretty light. They'll make it to be 4 rounds, they'll make it to be 7 rounds. So it depends who's running temescal and how they have been taught. Traditionally in temescal, and I know we hit 12:45, so I'm going to try to rush a little faster. But in traditional temescal, usually women are supposed to be the ones who run temescal, because that center part that is dug into Mother Earth is the connection of a woman's umbilical cord, of an ombligo, to this moment. So the purpose in being in temescal and sweat lodge is that you're basically being reborn. You are reconnecting with that umbilical cord with Mother Earth. And so that's why usually usually traditionally it's women who run temescal. For temescal, it's very women must wear like skirts, and men must wear pants traditionally. And so women can't do temescal when you're on your period, because it's a very sacred moment. You're already in a ceremony itself, so then you putting yourself in another ceremony can open a lot of energies that you may not be ready to deal with. But everybody, especially queer folks who are trying to change these things and challenge these things, have said like, what if I'm a male identified person, but I want to wear a skirt to temescal because that's more comfortable, right? And so here on Chico's land, because this is part of Chico's land, we run temescal in a very queer way. So if men want to wear skirts, men will wear skirts. If women want to be naked, women will be naked. If men want to offer the songs in the prayer, then men will offer. And so it's a very queer space in which we also are very careful when we have the two spirits ceremony. What we do is we'll run three temescales. So we'll do one basically for two spirit people, where it can be a super untraditional, I guess you can call it. And then we run a traditional temescal for women and a traditional temescal for men. So then that way also the elders who aren't there yet, you know, ready to like queer these spaces, can also have their moment of prayer in the way that they've been taught and the way that they've learned. And so that's one of the ways in which we're queering danza. Here in the center, it's just like in the entrance of some ceremonies, certain people have to carry water, certain people have to carry fire, and that's also very related to the female and the male energy. Here you can see I'm carrying like a big barrel of like water, and traditionally women aren't supposed to carry the water, but because we were creating the space, it's like, okay, I'm gonna carry it. And then the last picture right here is a cup of chocolate. So it's chocolate, but not processed chocolate, which is kind of spicy and very euphoric, and it makes you have a lot of lucid dreams. And so there is a chocolate ceremony that some people know how to run, and it's a very intense ceremony that you really have to prepare for. We're always very careful in who's able to participate in the ceremony, because it opens up a lot of emotions, a lot of auras, a lot of parts of you. And so through my first chocolate ceremony was the first time that I had very vivid lucid dreams of things that I had dreamt of when I was a little girl, that allowed me to feel more comfortable and fully identifying as a two-spirit person. And so I want to end there. I wouldn't say end, because I feel like end is like, there's so much more we can learn. I will pause there, and hopefully in my position as an MCC coordinator, I can host more workshops and more dialogues, spaces for us to talk a little bit deeper about everything that I shared today. But I want to thank all of you for being so attentive. I see all of you like just, you know, really taking all the knowledge in, and I appreciate that. I know it's Saturday, but we're going to open it up to questions. So Sophia, do you want to run questions? Do you want to let people just ask questions?
Yes, I just want to say really quick, thank you so much for that presentation. It's really cool how you're creating these spaces, but also keeping in mind tradition. And for questions, yes, just ask whatever you want. You can put it in the chat, or you can just ask it through voice or camera. I just want to open up the floor. Does anyone have any questions?
And no question is wrong. I'm gonna tell you right now.
I'm curious a little bit about just like how this new environment, like all just online, has been for you, and if there's just anything that you're maybe looking forward to or would like to do in the future.
Of course, thank you so much. Yeah, it's definitely been more difficult. This past year was the first time that we had an online version of the Two Spirits ceremony. And so the first year it was pretty well, like we had 112 participants in the virtual world. And then this year we did only have, I think, about 42 people. So the numbers definitely went down. One of the things that like I really try to keep in mind is that I have to continue to learn, even if I'm not sharing practice anymore with them every day, right? And so I highly, highly encourage you, if you have Facebook, to follow the Bates team, so the Bay Area Indian, Native American, Two-Spirit folks. Really follow them, because every week they do different workshops and different speakers who do identify as Two-Spirit, and it goes from like political to like ecological to a lot of different things. So I to preserve and grow that identity part of me, I constantly try to learn that way. Instagram, oh my, even TikTok, like TikTok has so many, if you put hashtag two spirit, like there is a lot. There's also, be careful, there's people who are like Jason Mars, as the person said at the end, but there's a lot of knowledge that you can learn. So that's kind of how I've kept my spirit, and I try to talk to Chico as often as I could. Thank you.
That's awesome. Thank you. Just thank you so much for everything today. It's been awesome.
Of course, thank you. So I see here, Audrey said, how can non-Indigenous people be allies and help create space for Two-Spirit people? That's a great question. I actually just hosted a workshop on that a few weeks ago, and we're gonna be hosting a second part of that, of how we can be allies. So I will say, elevate the voices, right? Like if you start to follow an Instagram page who is of Two-Spirit folks, reshare those posts. If you see that there's a lot of more difficult, heavier things happening to Two-Spirit folks, especially those who are like incarcerated or those who are in detention centers. The intersection of undocumented and Two-Spirit is a whole other part, but elevating the voices. And so when you get to hear the stories and when you get to learn about them, right, reshare them, right? Don't replicate them, but reshare them and be like, oh yeah, like I learned this and I just wanted to share this with you. When you see an injustice happening, say something about it, right? It's like the famous quote of like, if I stay quiet in a moment of oppression, then I'm part of the problem, right? And so I would definitely say, elevate the voices and put yourself in places where you can learn more about those things.
And I think, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go for it. I was gonna read the next question.
Oh, cool. I just heard you mention that you did a workshop on this. Is that through the MCC? Like, if people want to find out more about that, how would they find that?
Yes, so it was through the MCC. It was Indigenous Allyship. So if you can go follow our Instagram, if you do have Instagram, if you go follow the MCC page for Cal Poly, I'll be posting more on there when we do the second part of it. Otherwise, if you just want to go ahead and email me, I'll go ahead and put my email in the Dropbox so that you can all have my email. If you want to be a part of the next workshop that I have, then I can make sure that I include you in that email so that you can be a part of it. That's such a good question. Thank you, Sophia.
Yes, no problem. Thanks so much.
All right, so yeah.
Go for it.
So Lydia said, how do you deal with Native elders who are homophobic, transphobic? I know you talked about it already, but I was wondering if you had any thoughts on navigating that. Yes, there will always be, unfortunately, there will always be elders who are transphobic or homophobic. And I think Xochitl has been the biggest teacher and maestro for me in that. And just learning how to understand that they come from historical trauma, that it may not necessarily be like, oh, I just like don't agree with the way that you are. It's never that. And even outside of indigeneity, when somebody is against anything that you strongly believe or that you are, it's never about just you and them. It's about a much more deeper historical context. And so one of the things that my elders always teach me is colonization left so much damage, and it continues to, like, we continue to feel that residue. And so my job as youth, right, in this community is to sit with my elders and try to understand that and say, okay, like, why is it that you said this comment, right? Like, why is it that you feel this way? And then depending on that, how that conversation goes, then you can feel like why it is that happens, right? Is it that they're just like angry at something else, or is it like historical trauma that's happening? And so that's how I deal with it. Like I said, the first time it happened to me, I cried because I was like, oh my gosh, like that, she's one of the most amazing elders that like people know. But then after that too, it's just like learning that, yes, elders are sacred and they're honorable and they're important, but also in the danza world, there's a reason why we dance in a circle, because there is nobody that is higher than you. There is nobody that holds more than you. There is any, like in dance and cheer, like I said, it was like the front people were the ones that were the best dancers, right? And then those of us who were bad, we were in the back. But in the danza world, that doesn't exist. Like, we are all dancing and moving in a movement. And so I try to remember that when those things happen, like, yes, you are my elder and you know more, but also like, we're here to learn together. And so that's how I deal with it. I always try to remember that there's a lot of historical trauma that I may not know about. The next question is, do you think that colonization and the homophobic, cisgender-oriented beliefs they brought with them had any effect on indigenous groups' acceptance of two-spirit people? Yes, 110% yes. Like the video mentioned, the instance of the Cherokee woman who tried to marry on the reservation and who they didn't allow to do that until later on, and even with repercussions, is one of the many cases in which colonization shifted the ways in which indigenous folks were able to identify as two-spirit or with any other of their gender and sexuality ways of being. I see that, as I said, like even in my danza community, there's some of our elders who are like, yeah, like that's not okay, like a man and a woman should marry. And that has a lot to do with the Catholic religion and the colonization that happened with that, and with the establishment of missions and with all of those things. And so I know, for example, that like when my family members don't accept those things, it's because it comes from that. It comes from the fear of being who you need to be, and the fear of, let's be real, of genocide, of murder, because that is what occurred, of rape that happened to people who were different, who weren't, you know, the way that religion established and colonization established of what it meant to be female and male. Does that answer the questions of folks who did answer questions? I'm going to pause there because I didn't allow for you to process more.
Yeah, thank you.
Of course. All right, so there's another one that says, if we wanted to learn more about these dance spaces, where could we go to learn more about it? So in COVID world, it's much more difficult. There is some grupos who are starting to practice more in person and be back in person again. Personally, my maestra, Jenny Luna in Ventura, we haven't been back in person because we have a lot of family members who are elders and we care for, and so we're very careful with that. We do, however, have our circle every Sunday in the virtual space. So if you want to be invited to my Danza Círculo, you can email me and I can send you the Zoom link to that, and I can give my grupo a heads up like, hey, I have some people who are interested in learning about danza. And so because it's a virtual world, don't get scared, we don't dance. We basically share just like knowledge that we have. So we learn more about like Aztec gods and goddesses. They're called deities in our world, but they call them goddesses. We learn more about those things. We learn more about ceremony. We learn songs. We learn the meanings of like regalia. And every Sunday is a different topic. So it's really just become a learning space. However, more than likely, anywhere that you're located, I know California more than any place, but anywhere that you're located, there's bound to be a danza group. I promise you. I know that there's one in the San Luis Obispo area. I don't know the name of it, but I can get you the name of it because I want to dance with them when I come to the region. But on Facebook, a lot of them are on Facebook. So if you put like Danza Azteca, like a whole group will come out to you. That's probably the best way to go about it. But if you want to email me and tell me where you're located, I can find you a group. I should do a website of that. Find your local danza grupo. But yeah, so I'm here as a resource. I'm new to Cal Poly as the Latinx and Indigenous Initiatives Coordinator. And so I really hope that we as the Cal Poly community can grow more in understanding and respecting and honoring Native and Indigenous ways of being. I can only, teach and share what I know from my roots, but I'm always open to learning. I'm here to learn way more about the Yaqui Tutu people because that is whose lands we're on. So as I move forward in my time at Cal Poly, I will definitely make sure that I'm also inclusive of what gender and sexuality means for the Native people of the regions whose lands we're on. Any other like last burning question? All right, Sophia, you want to take it away to close it?
Yes, thank you so much, and thanks for all the wonderful questions. And yeah, thank you all so much for attending. Thank you for hosting and leading this discussion. We would love your feedback on this session, so if you could please fill out this form, I'll drop in the chat in just 1 second. There's going to be 2 feedback forms, by the way, one for the session, and then we'll email you at the end of the day for one for the overall conference. It'd be great if you could fill out both. And also, if you attend all 3 sessions today, your name will be entered in a giveaway 3 times, so 3 times more of a chance of winning than just one. And you can find the survey in the chat, and I'll also drop the schedule for the rest of the conferences today. And again, thank you all so much for attending. Thank you, Erika, for hosting and helping us all become a little bit more knowledgeable. And maybe I'll see you all in another session, and have a beautiful day.
Of course, really fill out the survey. I highly encourage you all. It's going to help for us to be able to have more of these workshops and show the university that we need them. So fill them out. If you're not too interested yet in going to the second session, I will put a little plug in. There's another indigenous presentation going on in the next session that I'm jumping on to listen to learn with all of you. And so do that. And just last one, someone asked my horoscope. I'm a Scorpio. No attacks, but I am a Scorpio, but also a cusp in Scorpio. So it's interesting. I'm born on a cusp no matter what. But thank you so much, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you all.